Hello, we are now live. This is Live with Marcel and Kilani, and thank you all so much for joining us today. Whether you are joining us live or whether you are viewing this broadcast after it's live, that's cool too. We are live on LinkedIn, Facebook, on Twitter, and of course our YouTube channel as well. So if you have not subscribed yet, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel and therefore stay, current and stay connected with, with our episodes. And welcome, of course, Kilani. You're joining us again today, which is awesome.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, everyone, as always, for watching. Let us know in the comments if you're watching live or the replay. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll put them up on the screen and have a conversation around them as well.
Yeah, good stuff. And today's episode is on future leadership, right? Kind of especially with regards to a new generation that is stepping into the workforce. The Gen Zs, and maybe some of the challenges that we might be seeing when working with younger people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is such an important topic and something that we touch on quite a bit, and for good reason, I think, because Gen Zs are such a different generation from anything we've ever seen before. I think we've seen quite a jump between, the Gen X and the millennials, but jumping to Gen Zs now is kind of like a whole different world. There's new jargon, there's different kinds of jokes that are they're almost like meta jokes. You have to know the joke of the joke to get the joke. And there's a lot of confusion, I feel like, around Gen Zs, and learning to kind of navigate that and communicate with kind of a whole different world of people can be really helpful and important in leadership.
Yeah, and you work with, of course, a lot with Gen Zs that are now in the workforce. What do I guess what is one of the most common challenges that you're seeing in your coaching clients in that Gen Z generation?
I think there are two kind of pressing topics. The first one being a difference in values between the two. And I speak very broadly on two generations here, even though it's actually kind of a split between Gen Zs and then all the other generations now, as millennials have kind of grown up and kind of started to adapt more to the workforce. But I've noticed that Gen Zs have very different principles and values than the other generations do. They value more collaboration, being heard, not having to kind of be a workhorse in at work, and to be respected for the collaboration that they put in, the talents that they already have, and finding unique growth opportunities in their organization to keep building on what they already have, as opposed to kind of putting their heads down and working for 20, 30 years until they can work their way to the top. And then I think the other thing is, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on what the other topic was now. We can start with that one, and then I can always come back with the other one.
Yeah, absolutely. And no worries at all. And of course, for the viewers too, if you have comments and things that you're seeing with regards to some potential challenges that you hear from your, Gen Z colleagues and employees, feel free to chime in, right? And throw that in there, because it is such an important topic, and it's something that for me, being kind of a Gen Xer, and working a lot with clients who are in that Gen X space and Gen Y. I see a lot of misconceptions around kind of, how Gen Z is going to be operating in an organization. And I see a lot of blind spots as well, right? Where there is this belief that, we can just kind of keep doing the same thing that we're doing, and Gen Zs will adapt. right? And I find that really, really interesting, because from all of the research that we can see, that's actually not the case. And of course, this is a huge generalization, and within the Gen Z space, so I'm surely there's there are people who can adapt, right, and can kind of follow that typical corporate model, right? That the old-fashioned corporate model, that vertical model, so to speak. But so many youngsters today identify that they don't necessarily fall in that type of category, and therefore find it difficult to even place themselves, let alone for companies to place them, right? And I find that a really interesting conversation, right? Because it's like I see so many companies, they claim that they have a system in place for Gen Zs, and yet those same companies, when you're talking to Kilani, when you're talking to these Gen Zs, you're hearing that there's actually very little that's being done, right? Which I find really interesting. Is on one side I'm talking to kind of these people say, oh yeah, we have a fantastic system to kind of onboard them and set them up for success, and to do all of these, and we're integrating technology, and we're doing all these wonderful things. And then you talk to the Gen Zs and they're like, no man, nothing. It's like, this place sucks. Right? And I find that really interesting, that we're okay with being so disconnected from this future generation.
Yeah, I think that, and I guess this comes back to something we talk about a lot, which is the idea of trust. And I do see that there's movement in trying to create more of an environment that, would help Gen Zs grow. But what I'm seeing a lot of from my experience is that a lot of older leaders are with good intention, creating all of these programs for Gen Zs to be onboarded, but it's coming from the perspective and the mind of someone in a different generation, right? So while they somewhat understand what Gen Zs are looking for, it's hard to still, fully be in the perspective of someone who is, like I said, in a completely different world, right? And so I think to maybe even have Gen Zs communicate their needs, and maybe that may be hard too, because being so young, sometimes Gen Zs don't know what they need, but to kind of have someone who's in that position already to kind of be on the decision-making team of how do we actually onboard these people, which I think could be really important as well. And what that reminds me of, the reason why I say that there may be a difference between what Gen Zs really want and what older generations think Gen Zs want, is I was actually reading an article the other day that was written about how to communicate with Gen Zs, and it was a very funny article, very well written. But reading it from a Gen Z perspective, they were saying, here are the words that Gen Zs use, and I was like, I've never used any of those words in my life. And it was kind of a description of the generalization of Gen Zs, the same way we would say millennials only drink oat lattes and wear cool hats, right? Like, that's not the whole idea of a millennial. Same thing with Gen Zs. They say they make these weird jokes about things on the internet, and while that may be true to an extent, there's a lot there that isn't highlighted, and to no one's fault either, because it's something that can only be seen from the perspective of someone who's already in that experience, which is something that I'm observing a lot.
Yeah, and you bring a good point, right? Because it's almost like, as you were talking about that article and the way that it was written, that would almost be like an article on women's leadership, right? Written by men. Right? Kind of like, hey, this is how you talk to a woman.
Right.
This is how you, right? And this is how a woman would like to, I mean, can you imagine if we actually wrote an article about this is how you, how you talk to women, right? In the workforce, or how you talk to people of color or people of certain religion. That could be potentially seen as quite offensive in a way. right? And yet we seem okay to have that conversation with regards to generations, and there seems to be a tolerance for that, right? It's like the opposite, right? Ageism, where people who are older, for example, are still kind of being ignored, right? Because they're older, or they're not being chosen for certain roles because they might be considered too old, right? And we have this acceptance, I think, and not just in the corporate world. I think in society in general, is that it's still okay to label people based on their age, right? And we've come so far from a DEI perspective, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, um, where there is this tremendous awareness that's growing in the workforce with regards to you know gender diversity, cultural diversity, even cognitive diversity of, like, having different people and different kind of like ideas and thoughts, and there's so much happening in that space, but not so much with regards to age diversity. That doesn't seem to be a big conversation. I find that really interesting. It's like, what is it about us that's missing the mark here? That we think it's okay just because a person lacks experience, right? In the workforce, that they're therefore not going to be a valuable voice. On the other hand, we can also flip that, is what makes us say that a person who has a lot of experience doesn't have the energy or the stamina to be able to pivot and adapt and use technology and to do all of those kind of things. To me, it almost sounds like it's like one of the last frontiers of DEI that we have not yet addressed. And yet we still think it's okay for us to label people based on their age, right? We do that with Gen Zs. We also do that with people who are older. As we How often do we not hear people say, "Oh, that person's really old," or that person's really young, and I'm wondering if that tolerance that we're seeing there, right? Or maybe a lack of awareness, right, of that conversation, that we don't have a lot of spokespeople, I guess, in companies, right, who are able to stand up and say, "Hey, that's inappropriate," right? Labeling a person as a young person, labeling a person as an old person, is just as inappropriate as labeling a person as female versus male, or color versus non-color, or what. And we need to be, I think, very sensitive to the fact that this is going to be our future, right? And that the majority of Gen Zs, that are growing into the workforce, are probably way more sensitive to diversity and inclusion, because they're being raised generally, right? And of course, there's a huge generalization, but if we look at Western education system, where these kids go to school, the majority of them are going to school being educated by schools and their teachers on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're learning to be tolerant, and they're learning to be open, right, to different cultures. And then when they come into a company, being kind of this person who is prepared to be a valuable member of the workforce, and then is treated, right, as a separate generation, what kind of effect is that going to have on the psychology of that person, right? And it's and I find it very interesting that that we're actually not having more conversations around that sensitivity. That somebody who comes fresh out of high school, for example, is 18 years old, may have more to wisdom and more to offer about a business than somebody who's been in the company for 30 years, right? Or vice versa. But that we from a diversity standpoint, we can't discount the one or the other just because they're inexperienced or just because they're maybe too experienced. What we want to do is we want to be able to create an environment where both of those people can sit in a room and be completely comfortable treating each other as equals, right? And that's ultimately the goal of diversity, equity, inclusion, is that we can all sit in a room, no matter how different we might be from each other, but that we can all sit in a room and actually see each other in an unbiased way as equals. And it's only then that we're going to be able to build psychological safety and trust and all of those kind of things where people are not afraid to come from a perspective, and they're not afraid to be wrong in their perspective, but they're willing to voice it anyway, because ultimately the more perspectives that are shared in a room, right, is going to lead to healthier conversations, and a lot more innovation, that we might see if we have a group of people in the room that are all just having the same conversation because they all have the same way of looking at the world, right? And so the goal of diversity and equity inclusion really is to say, hey, how can we create a workforce that is diverse on one side, but they see each other, no matter how diverse they are, they see each other as equals. And unfortunately, because we are all raised with certain biases, right? We have an unconscious bias that we're raised with, that feeds into our belief system, and it's our ability to override that bias, that's going to help us see other people as our equal, no matter how young or how old or how different they might be. And we're at a point right now where we're not quite ready for that. I think society in general, right, is getting there, right? We're moving in that direction, and we see that in companies, and especially there are people who have amazing initiatives in organizations where they're fighting hard to create kind of this DEI culture, and it's an uphill battle because majority of the workforce is biased, right? Because we're raised with our own biases, and we, like me, for example, my generation, I was raised, and I hate to say it this way, but I was, when I was a young adult, it was completely okay to be intolerant towards people of a certain sexual preference, right? And a certain pronoun, and it was socially acceptable to be intolerant to people like that. And we've come so far, right, over the past 40 years or so, where that's not considered okay anymore. And I think that's wonderful. I think that's fantastic. I mean, your grandma, my mom, she was a political activist in South Africa for human rights, for that reason, because she believed that that we should all be treated equally and fairly, right? Um, and so I think for people like us, it's an easy adjustment, right? To be able to kind of see people for kind of who they are rather than what they are. And but for a lot of other people, that's a much more greater challenge. And I think where Gen Z is going to provide an amazing benefit is the fact that they, much more so than us, right? They were raised with kind of an intolerance towards kind of labeling people, right? And I think there's a greater acceptance and a greater tolerance towards and maybe even kind of a much more natural way of just accepting people for their difference and actually learning to leverage on that difference because they've had so much more practice at it because they were born into it and they were educated into it. And I think for the first time, right, we're going to see a generation of people that are going to be the bridge of what we call DEI. And without this generation, we're not going to be able to be as successful, right, in overriding those biases, and so the Gen Z as a generation, they're tremendously important for any workforce because they're going to give us this opportunity to solidify that, permitting, right, that we don't label them and we don't put them in pigeonholes, right, as, oh, they're just young, they're inexperienced, they don't know anything, or Gen Zs think they know everything, or Gen Zs are, they're entitled and they're all, we're labeling this generation. And by doing that, I think we miss a tremendous opportunity of actually creating a culture of people, and not just in the workspace, but also in society in general. We miss out because this generation has so much wisdom to offer, and so much expertise when it comes down to actually being able to be unbiased with regards to working with people who might look different or behave different, or and we can learn a lot from this generation from that perspective, which we should be using as an example, rather than something that we're just kind of pigeonholing. And I'd love to see companies leverage on that. I'd love to see companies say, hey, you know what, let's take these people who are fresh out of university or fresh out of high school and say, let's leverage on that wisdom, right? That unbiased acceptance of people who are different, and let's learn from them. Let's ask them, give them permission to teach us how to do this, right? And let them be the leaders in that space. And I think that is such a critical component here, and why in our next book, right, where we talk about leadership of the future, why it's so important for us to move away from this kind of traditional way of doing business, this hierarchical kind of vertical ladder that people think they have to climb through to make it into a certain leadership position, right? Which worked in cultures of yesteryear, but it doesn't work in this new world that's arriving very soon. It's not going to work in the future, not if we want to be leveraging on them from this diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, right? And so the philosophy that, and I've mentioned this a few times, but for me, I really believe that the organization of yesteryear worked like a pyramid, right? We had the CEO sitting at the top, and you had these layers of employees starting at the ground level, and then you have to kind of prove yourself, and you make it to the next level and to the next level, and and so on. And I still see many organizations, even the the big tech firms, right? What we call the top fives, right? They even have levels of employees that still kind of, have to go through in terms of their promotions and the workload that's or the type of work that they end up doing at each of these levels really kind of shows you that when they're at a lower level, they're not doing a lot in leadership. But as those levels become higher and higher, it becomes more leadership oriented. Every now and then you'll see an organization today, which I call the organization of today, which is a lot flatter, right? They're not as not as vertical as a lot of these structures. And what I mean with a lot flatter is you'll have maybe your senior leadership at the top, but under that you just have a whole bunch of different departments and people, and everybody's just trying to work together, right, to create new products and to do all of these kind of things, and that works okay. But I honestly believe that if we really want to fully integrate the concept of unbiased DEI, so unbiased diversity, equity, inclusion, where we can all leverage on each other, that is going to change from a flat dish, which I call a dish or a petri dish, right, into a ball. And what that means is that we're not going to have that same kind of hierarchy anymore, and where one day I can be a follower of for example a 20-year-old who comes fresh into the company and who is leading some form a DEI, for example, initiative, or is creating new technology that's relevant, that I know nothing about, that no matter, even if I am more senior, I'm willing to follow that person, say, teach me, guide me, right, and see what we come up with. And so we'll see in the future, we'll see organizations that where on one day in one project you might be the leader, but on another day in another project you might be the follower, right, and somebody else might be taking the lead. And so I believe that part of this whole DEI conversation is also an ability to let go of this notion that I have to be the leader, that I have to be the one who is kind of running the show, so to speak, but rather that we're all leading this together, and we're all in this together, and we're sharing these leadership hats and the followership hats, just based on a situational process, right? And I think that is going to be the organization of the future. And what's so critical about Gen Z is that they're going to be, and of course this is a generalization, but they're most likely going to be the most adaptable generation that can fit into that mold. And it's people who are not willing to address that blind spot, right? Who are kind of stuck on this whole notion of this hierarchy and this vertical kind of way of that you have to earn your way up the ladder. These people can potentially derail the evolution of an entire organization if we're not prepared to have those conversations. And that shift, right, from going from a kind of a vertical ladder or a pyramid to a petri dish to a ball, a bouncing ball that can kind of bounce with the changes in the markets and all of those kind of things. That's a process. And if as an organization, if you're not having those conversations today, you're going to be ill prepared for the challenges that's going to be awaiting you in the next 5 years, right? It's not that far away, and we can all pretend, and we can all say, well, as long as I'm making money today, who cares what's going to be happening in 5 years? But if we want to have some form of a longevity in what we're doing, then we're going to need to address this, right? So I wholeheartedly agree. I think this is the kind of the last frontier of blind spots that is being so overlooked by organizations, and maybe even by society in general, right? Is that the concept of ageism. That if that's not addressed, we're going to set ourselves up for potential failure in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the most important takeaway from what you said is that when it comes to leading a new generation, and really anyone as well, the most important piece is to really take every individual as the individual they are, instead of kind of trying to fit everyone into this one little box and having one specific way of doing things for everyone, when we do acknowledge that everyone is uniquely different, and not just in the sense of DEI, but also in the sense of every experience we've had as human beings shapes us in our perspective in a different way. And I think that kind of the one way to not go wrong, I guess, in leadership, if we could put a right or wrong to it, is to really just be present with the individual at hand and see, how can I best support this person as the person they are? And using that kind of as a general rule to kind of, build out systems to make it a little more streamlined and easier. Because I know that time is important.
Wonderful. I love that. I think if I could kind of rephrase that, it's almost like, we're all the same by being different. Right? Is that we all have the similarity, and the one similarity that we all have is that we're different. And maybe that's also why the bouncy ball concept of leadership, right, is that the only way that we are going to be able to move forward, because that's the only model that celebrates everybody, being equal in their differences, right? And that we can leverage on those differences, permitting that we treat every individual as a resource, right, of tremendous wisdom and experience, no matter how young, old, culturally different, or whatever it is. And that level of cultural diversity, right, cognitive diversity that you're then talking about, where every individual comes from a completely different experience, and in that we can all agree we are the same, right? Is that we are the same because we're different, and that is going to be that ideal model in the future, right, where we can walk into an organization and know that we're being celebrated for the fact that we're different, because that's what makes us the same, right? As where right now, today, I think there's still too many differences that are still being used as certain labels and things like that, and we're not there yet. We still have a long way to go to be able to create a culture of people that celebrate each other's differences, right? That celebrate each other for having different opinions and different perspectives, moving away from what we think is right and wrong and all of those kind of things, and rather just kind of celebrating different, right? I want to hear a different perspective. I want to hear a different opinion, not because it's right or wrong, but because it's different. And it's when we combine all of these different opinions and different thoughts and different ideas together in one space, that's when the magic really happens, right? That's where amazing ideas come to light, and we're far from there. I do know of one or two organizations that are kind of creating prototypes around this way of working, right? And it's called community-based leadership. That's the term that a couple of these companies are creating. And there's one really great example is a company called Roche, which is a pharmaceutical company, and they've just recently done away with the whole job description thing, and they've done away with the levels and all of that kind of stuff. Like, you could have been with a company for 30 years. You're at the same level as a Gen Z that comes into the company. And it's a tremendously courageous attempt to kind of creating this community of people that leverage on each other. And what's interesting about that is all they do, which it kind of is really, really, really interesting, is all they've done is they've removed all of the titles and all of this kind of stuff, and they just simply put a bunch of people in a room together. And the only requirement that they have is that they hire good people. Right. And their philosophy is that if we have really talented people and really passionate people, and we put them in the same room together, something amazing is going to come out of that. We don't know what it is, but something amazing will come out of that. And what they're learning from that is that that's exactly what's happening. Is these people are just by being a community and communicating with each other, they're creating little work groups, and they're creating little initiatives, and they're creating products, right, for this organization. These things that the organization could never have thought up themselves, right? Simply because they have really talented people, and they're giving these talented people just complete autonomy, complete space to just say, hey, create whatever. We just want to see from you whatever is that's happening. And it's incredible what's actually coming out of that. It's a learning curve, but we are seeing that, the results are really, really promising, and it's still very much in a prototype space, and Roche has kind of limited that to kind of certain groups in Europe and and places like that where they're just observing, and they're just going to say, hey guys, go crazy, just do. We're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to tell you how long you have to work. We're not none of that kind of stuff. We just trust you guys are amazing at what you do. You guys just be a community and figure stuff out. And the performance results are already starting to show tremendous growth in how they're performing, just by being this bouncy ball, right? That's just kind of bouncing with kind of market trends and where they're going, because the communities, they create their own kind of job descriptions, and it's based on per project. It's not even, you might, one day be, kind of a project leader, and the next day you might be, kind of a software developer, right? For a different project, and so there's this great ability to leverage on each other and creating these little teams and these little workforces inside this big community that's producing some really promising results. And I love that. And I believe that slowly but surely we're going to see more and more companies come up with these types of initiatives. But it takes a tremendous amount of courage. I mean, you imagine, right, as an organization, that you just kind of say, hey guys, we're just getting rid of the whole job description thing and the expectation that you work a certain amount of hours a week, and all of that's gone. You are now a community, and we're just going to trust that you guys come up with good stuff because you guys are amazing at what you do. And I mean, that's going to be an interesting process for a lot of companies, right? So I can't wait to see what actually comes out of some of these prototypes, and I think it'll be very, very interesting.
Yeah. What I really like about that ball idea, and last thing I'll say, because I see we're coming up on time here, but what I really like about that is it kind of takes us back to the times when we lived in communities, and kids just learn from the people around them how life works. And I think what's really great about that is it gives you room to experiment and try new things, and you'll learn very quickly what works and what doesn't, but it gives you the opportunity to bring in new ideas, new things that work, and then you kind of pass that down to the next generation in the workforce, and then the next and the next, and over time it just develops into something new, and it creates the space to constantly evolve with things that happen in the world and the organization. And I think having that freedom could be very, very helpful, as it just allows you to be a lot more you can pivot a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, as you're saying that, right, as what comes to mind for me too is how it also reduces our need for leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I really believe that and I've studied leadership for many years, and so I'm kind of invalidating my own research and my own work. But I've really come to an understanding that in a community based, kind of like in one of those balls, we don't need to lead people. Right. It's like it almost becomes obsolete. Our leadership style almost becomes to not lead. Right. And where in the vertical column, right, we still love to lead. We still feel like we have to motivate people, and we have to keep people in a kind of a certain, kind of way. And so there are all of these type of strategies and things like that, so it makes us feel important. Right. If I'm a leader, I'm like, wow, look at me. I was like, I'm supporting my people and setting them up for success. But in a community based, it's self-regulated. Right. People just regulate themselves because you're operating under the premise. And I think this is probably going to be one of the most important factors of community based leadership is that you have the right people in place. And I think that's the most important thing. So what that's going to mean is that we're also going to have to see a lot of innovations in talent acquisition, right, and recruitment. And that we can't just hire people based on the CV anymore, because when we do, we're already pigeonholing. Right, we need to start hiring on attitude, not on aptitude. Because in community-based leadership, it's not about aptitude, because we can leverage on each other. Right, it really is around attitude, our ability to be collaborative and not competitive. Right, and the ability to be willing to leverage on each other and to trust each other and to do all of those kind of things. That's going to be kind of a much more important factor. And when you have a group of people in the room that know they can trust each other, and they know that great things are going to come up because they just inherently trust the process, and they have amazing kind of work ethic, and they have amazing kind of desire to learn and grow, you put those people in a room and amazing things are going to happen. And they don't need to be led in the same way as what we think we have. And so I also believe, and I think this is going to be one of the biggest challenges for people from my generation, because we have a tendency to overvalue, right, kind of our input, and we have to overvalue, kind of the leadership that we actually then are creating. And that's probably going to be one of the biggest forms of resistance is that we're going to see to this, is that people are going to feel invalidated because they can't be the leader anymore, because they don't, the organization doesn't need that type of leadership anymore. And that's going to be fascinating, right? Is when you can actually see something like that. And I really believe it's going to be sooner than later. Like I said, there are already a couple of companies that I know of that are already trying these things. And when they start producing success, right? Other companies are going to go, oh wait, why are we not doing that? And that is also going to trigger, like for example, education systems. So if we look at education system, and for example, in United States, right, is an education system that still today values individualism and competition. Right, people compete for spots in the next higher school. They're very competitive with each other. But in societies like, for example, Europe, they're learning to be, kids learn at a very young age to not be competitive, but to be collaborative, to leverage on each other, and they're learning that at a very young age. So we will see these challenges that are going to happen with, when people kind of grow up in a certain culture, and they're like, all right, I'm now super competitive, I'm Superman, or Superwoman, and and then they're in this they find themselves in this collaborative culture of this community, how are they going to adapt to that, right? So there are going to be some really, really interesting things I'm going to see that we're going to be seeing in the next 5 to 10 years, which I really can't wait to see, because I think it really is going to spark tremendous innovation and tremendous growth, by the way, for society because of that. Yeah, and so that's kind of where I think I'll leave it for today. As you can see, we can talk about this stuff for hours. But and that's what and that's also what we're highlighting in the book, right? Is that there is this different way, and that if we don't embrace this potentially different way, we might be setting ourselves and our people up for failure, not for success.
Yeah, I agree. Is that our last comment for the day?
Yeah, I think that was a good closing comment for today. Yeah. So, and how about you? Do you have any last things to say about that?
Nope, that's it for me. I think just kind of the last takeaway, again, just being, the presence and the taking each individual as they are as an individual. I feel like with that principle in work and in life, you can't go wrong with it.
Yeah, exactly. By being different, we are the same.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's and that's something we need to celebrate, right? Is that we are alike by being disalike. And and if I feel like I'm judging a person because they're not the same or they think differently, then that's maybe an opportunity for reflection, right? Absolutely. Well, you know what? Thanks again for joining, Kilani. It's always such a so much fun doing these live shows with you, and we'll be back again next week.
Yeah, thank you as always. I agree. It's always fun to have these conversations. And if for all our viewers, if you are watching the replay or live, feel free to let us know any questions you have or comments you have. You can message us anytime. And also a reminder to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are giving away some fun free stuff for our first 100 subscribers. And it's another great way to tune into our content. And thank you as always for taking the time to tune in.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. And we'll see you during the next episode. Bye.